In November, like many, I had COVID. It wasn't as awful for me as for some, but it was bad enough. I had the aches and the chills, I had the sinus pain, I lost my sense of smell and taste, and everyone in my family got sick. At the end of my quarantine, the day I was allowed free, Thanksgiving Day, at 2 a.m, I got a call from my mom to tell me that my dad had collapsed and he couldn't get back up. They also had COVID. And my dad, with cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, was as high risk as he could be. And that kicked off 4 of the longest weeks of my life. Let me tell you, not once in those 4 weeks did I ever feel resilient. I felt exhausted. I was still weak from my own sickness. I was sleeping on my parents' couch most nights, jumping up a dozen times a night. I felt overwhelmed, making meals and cleaning up bodily fluids. I felt anxious, calling 911 multiple times. I can't even describe the desperation that I felt after he had been released from short hospital stays twice and still couldn't get out of bed and be safe on his own 2 feet. By the time he was admitted to the ER for the last time, he had dangerously low oxygen levels, fluid in one lung, signs of heart failure, and 2 cracked ribs from a fall that I was not able to prevent. I had nothing left. Somehow, miraculously, he survived. And so did I. But at the time, I honestly couldn't have told you how. Months later, here's what I know. Resilience is not something that you feel. Resilience is just the ability to endure what feels like it can't be endured. And in the worst times of my life, the thing that has actually helped me endure is the knowledge that people I love are depending on me. When I didn't feel like I had the strength to get out of bed one more day, I did anyway, for my mom and for my dad. When I really didn't care what happened next, I got up and made things happen anyways for my kids. And when I couldn't have cared less about taking care of myself, I went on walks and had real conversations for my husband and for my friends. This is what community means to me. It means that we have people that love us and support us, who are there for us and help us in time of need. But even more importantly, it means that we have people that we love. People that are our reason to keep going when we'd rather just crawl into a hole and never get out. Our people are counting on us, and we'll do whatever it takes to carry on for them. Coming out of this long, hard year, we're all looking for the answer to how we can be more resilient, more strong. And I think it's found there in our relationships. It can be terrifying to look around us. Our bodies are vulnerable. The world is full of injustice and cruelty. How are we supposed to keep going in the face of all that we've seen? We're not going to be strong by making ourselves tougher. And we're not going to endure by building walls to keep ourselves safe. We're only going to be strong by loving each other. And I don't mean love as a pretty concept or a word, but love as repeated daily actions of service and connection with real people. We're going to endure by committing to each other, not protecting ourselves from each other. And yeah, we will get hurt. If this year has taught us anything, it's that hurt is going to happen no matter what we do. The question isn't how to prevent it, but how to survive it. How to come out the other side, changed for sure, but still ourselves. And that's something we can't do alone. That's something that we do together. We endure because of each other and also for each other, discovering that there's literally nothing we can't make it through together. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Kylie Nocton, and if you could not tell by my professional headshot, I am a proud public educator at Center for Inquiry, school number 2, which is right downtown Indianapolis. I would normally not be the person to get on stage and to just share my side of the story, all the amazing things that I do. I try to stay humble, but I was given the opportunity to be that teacher voice, and I am so happy to be here with you today just to tell you the small glimpse of how teachers are resilient. Kind of when asked to speak upon resilience, we know it's that conversation of being faced with a challenge, developing that thick skin, you bounce back quickly, surviving that major storm. But honestly, every day we do know educators are faced with challenges, and this year was a different type of challenge. I almost think instead of resilience, we developed that resilience 2.0 as an educator in a pandemic. The things that we've been put through in the last year are going to and will continue on to impact our educational world. I've been virtual, in-person, back to virtual, back to in-person over 4 times, not even knowing what to expect within the next month, the next week, or even the next day, but knowing I'm sure to allow that peace and that normalcy within my students. As an educator, we have our plans, our backup plans, another plan after that. Like if you are on a disaster team, you want a teacher on your team. You're going to be safe. We naturally know how to resolve conflict and chaos. But one of the things with preparedness is kind of preparing for the worst is that we've been through it. We've adapted, we've planned different structures out. And for that time, it does exhaust educators. Right now, for us, it feels like our tanks are empty, and every time we even try to refill just a little bit, we're only able to fill that bare minimum. This year, we have scratched every single thing that we knew was best practice for teachers, and we have implemented pretty much everything new. I already know that in my profession, I'm going to wear many, many hats. I was adapted and morphed into an IT specialist, a counselor, a school nurse. Pretty much any job you can think of, I have done it twice, if not more. And knowing I had to wear many hats already, this year felt like every day I was showing up in a new wardrobe. Like any natural disaster, though, we definitely do not control weather. As a public educator, our choices, decisions, laws are actually allocated to us instead of by us, the actual real experts of education. Sometimes this is when I personally feel my most resilient self. So typically with resilience, we have that like reflection time, that time when we can say, oh my gosh, I survived that. Like that was a challenge. But unfortunately, as an educator, I feel like we are still going through that storm day in and day out. So what do we typically do after a big storm? We check in, we make sure there's no damage. If there's damage, we rebuild. So what I wanted to have the opportunity to do this morning with you is just to encourage you to check on a teacher. Check in with them, thank them for being resilient. For teachers, I'm asking you to just analyze the damage that have taken place this year. Refill your own tanks if you can. Even for lawmakers, I'm asking you maybe to even develop a stronger foundation where teachers feel supported and heard. And honestly, finally, I'm asking for a raise. No, I'm actually just kidding. But I really just want to continue to be a voice for educators and let them know that this year has been something that has changed and developed us, and for the good, not the worst. And I really do appreciate Creative Morning for allowing me to have this platform and be able to share my experience of how educators are resilient. Thank you.
Juanita Molanova. A few weeks ago, I went down this rabbit hole around resiliency. It all started with someone telling me I wasn't resilient enough. And for the first time in a while, I actually disagreed. I thought to myself, I am resilient. I think I'm resilient. What's resiliency anyway? And so I started looking it up. I looked up resiliency, which led to resistance, which led to a bunch of other things. And so here's the first piece that I want to share with you. Resiliency and resistance, it's not the same. Resiliency is that ability to recover, to restore to your original state after the disturbance or impact of an external event or circumstances. Resistance, on the other hand, is the ability to remain the same, to remain unchanged in the face of external events or circumstances. I've realized that often when people talk about resiliency and talk about wanting others, organizations to be resilient, they actually want resistance. And so I thought it was important to make that distinction. For example, I want my car to be resistant. If I get in an accident, I want that structure and shell to remain unchanged so I stay alive. When we think about cities in the aftermath of a natural disaster, we want those cities to be resilient. We want them to restore to their original state, infrastructure, public services, schools, as soon as possible. Now, what about this pandemic? Resistance has clearly been off the table. All of us, people, organizations, countries, have had to change due to external circumstances. Over the last 14 months, our lives have changed dramatically. And we've actually proven to be able to adapt and create new ways of operating, new ways of living. Now, here comes the second piece I want to share with you. And this really is the missing piece for me around resiliency. Because after everything that we've been through, will we revert back to our original state? Will we go back to normal, whatever that normal was? And to be honest, my biggest fear is that we might. And the issue with that is that the normal we were living in was actually not that great for a lot of people. We've all gotten to learn so much over the last 14 months, where some of us were living busy life of work first and self and relationships second. The lockdown had us stuck. Some of us took that space to create and connect with ourselves, with our families, maybe even create lives and schedules that are more aligned with our values. So will we keep what we created over the last months, or will we revert back to the busyness with little love or care or play? We've also created so much awareness around racial injustice and so much movement and commitment around racial justice. Will we go back to, well, this isn't about me and it's a lot of work and I had time then, but I don't have time to care now? Or will we actually continue the conversations and continue the work of self-education, of self-reflection, and continue the commitment and stand for equality? Will we go back to what was before, or will we create something better? I don't have an answer, and for now, all I have is an invitation. My invitation is for you to take inventory about what you've learned and what you've experienced over the last 14 months. Get clear on what matters to you, what you're committed to, and from there choose what to keep, what to leave behind, and what to change, and take that into the next chapter. My hope for me, for you, for all of us, is that we won't just stop at resiliency. We won't simply revert back to the way things were before, but we will actually create something better, a more equitable, brighter, kinder future for us all.
Hello, and my name is Athena Salisbury. I want to start off by giving a disclaimer because every time I speak someplace, I have to tell everybody the same thing. Any views that I express today are not the views of anybody else but me. So any organization, business, anything I belong to, they don't know what I'm about to say, so don't hold it against them, okay? So we're talking about resilience today, and I like to think of myself as a resilient person. Now, we know Oxford, Webster, they all give the definition of quickly recovering from difficulties, toughness. Of course, I consulted the Urban Dictionary because why not? It's for giggles, right? Urban Dictionary says that resilience is the ability to stand up to challenges, work through them step by step, and bounce back stronger than before. Now, for my definition, it's going to be real deep, y'all, so stay tuned for me. The resilience thing that I come up with is the non-visual hardships often endured unseen by others, but that strength, that inner strength that pushes you forward. I know, that was real deep, right? But I didn't know what resilience was. I didn't know how to become resilient until I started to look back at my past. My past was not a bed of roses, but it was not perfect either. I grew up on the northwest side of Indianapolis in an area that people would consider ghetto or hood, but we had everything that we needed in that area. We had seamstress, we had mechanics. Well, the men thought they were mechanics. They didn't do as bad, but they could have done better. We had a baker, we had a candy store, we had everything that we could possibly imagine. We didn't realize how broke we really were until we went out to the world and saw that people really had real basketball courts when we had a basketball court made out of a milk crate. So we got real resilient in my neighborhood. I seriously took a hard look at my life in high school, and I was like, man, all these people got Nike shoes on, and I don't have Nikes. But I took my style and I elevated it to something else. Why? Because I said I am resilient. I am what you would look at and say, girl, you look like $1,000,000, but I may have $10 in my pocket. That is what resilience looks like and feels like to me. The older I get, the more I realize that resilience is a necessary thing. And I joined with my business partner. We became Empowered Living Inc., a holistic approach to a better you, a mental health therapy practice, literally trying to help people find their resilience and build it and push them forward. And I did not think mental health was a thing until I got older, because I was like, mental health, that's for white people. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, what is this? What is this mental health thing? And it wasn't until I realized that the day you're born, you have something going wrong. Birth is not pleasant. When you get into this world, you're like, what is going on? And from the time you leave this earth, you are faced with a whole lot of challenges. And that builds your resilience. And I, myself, have learned that mental health is like the biggest thing. And so what I want to let people know today is that no, mental health is not a white people thing. It's an everybody thing. We have to take that resilience that we're built with, that internal fire, and push forward and help others. Because by us sharing our stories, by us standing in front of others, by us literally talking to the person on the street, we are sharing our resilience. You never know who you may come in contact with that says, hey, I'm having a bad day. Or you may have to use that context clue and see that they're sulking and say, okay, I need to help this person. Be willing and able to help. I would like to leave you guys with one of my sayings that I've kind of developed. Do not bury your gift. Make sure you share it. You do not want to take your gift to the grave, because nobody in the graveyard ever says, oh, I shoulda, coulda, woulda, and in that voice be heard. We need to make sure your voice is heard now. And, oh, my shameless plug, Adulting is a Trip. The book is coming out in mid-June, late June. It is a workbook to help you get through adulting and build that resilience and push forward. I want to thank you all for your time. God bless you. Have a good one.
Muy buenos días. My name is Andrea Zensenera, and as we continue the conversations on this topic, I want to share my personal experience of what it means to be resilient. Now, coming from Puerto Rico, we know this as la brega. This slang term is widely used in our day-to-day life. You can casually bump into your neighbor in the supermarket and ask how they're doing. 9 out of 10 times, their response is going to be, pues, ya tú sabes, en la brega. When you look into Puerto Rico's early history, from being colonized in the 1500s, enduring 400 years of Spanish colony, exploited for the gold and the resources, to becoming an imperialistic war prize of the United States in the late 1800s, more on that for another time, you will see that my island and its people are not strangers to adversity. A recent podcast series by WNYC by the same name describes La Brega as the combination of struggle, hustle, determination, survival, all wrapped into one word. La Brega is about dealing with the ongoing challenge that we can't see to solve. This is something that my elders in my community are familiar with, as they were targeted by eugenics and unethical medical trials for treatments in the 1950s. It's something that my mother is familiar with, as she started her career in healthcare, making $4 an hour in 1997, and today, 23 years later, she's $8 an hour and barely making $22,000 a year because she's part of a stagnant economy that doesn't recognize the experience and expertise in her profession. La Brega is something that is present for me during my 17 years in Puerto Rico, with a public education system that was designed to help the pocket of private contractors and political loyalties, as opposed to the students and teachers, which resulted in inadequate resources for the learning and led to the closures of hundreds of schools across the island. I also grew up in a country with an infrastructure system that is in shambles. And when I say shambles, I'm talking about a rural electrical grid that hangs on a thread with random blackouts throughout the day and the collective cheering across the neighborhood when it comes back. A system that it feels like a game of press your luck whenever you open your kitchen faucet, not knowing if you're going to have running water for that day. And it was time to use the reserved water buckets in order to at least take a shower during that week. A system so in shambles that in 2011, I was submitting assignments for my senior class using dial-up. Yes, dial-up in 2011, because broadband access was, for us living in the rural area, was something too costly for an infrastructure service provider to give to the people of the island. Oh, and some of you complain about potholes here in Indianapolis. And I've seen some of you on social media and on transit Twitter, but let me tell you, Puerto Ricans not only have to deal with the massive lunar craters in their roads, but also the occasional sinkhole and mudslides after heavy rain, which at times have left neighborhoods unable to access the rest of the town and services, resources that they need. Unfortunately, La Brega is something that future generations of Puerto Ricans will continue to endure. Just ask the recent graduates of the class of 2021, who are graduating this week across the island. Before they started their freshman year, they endured one of the worst hurricanes in our country's history, which left them without power for nearly a year. Or were one of the 4,800 families that lost a loved one due to inept response from both state and federal government during this disaster. Halfway through their sophomore year, they dealt with the uncertainty of daily earthquakes, many of them losing their schools or home due to structural damage. The summer right before their junior year, they witnessed the biggest political unrest in our history, which resulted in the resignation of the island's governor due to the scandal and corruption in our political system. And if things couldn't get worse, they spent their senior year in high school in the middle of this pandemic, while thousands of tourists thread the island selfishly as their own COVID paradise retreat. For my generation, La Brega meant that we had to make the most of what we have and what at hand was dealt with. It meant taking ownership of the situation in which we were powerless and making the most out of it, as the new day was just on the horizon, forcing thousands of us into exodus into the mainland for a better tomorrow, which is why I'm here today in Indianapolis, in search of a better future for my family. As a matter of fact, there are more Puerto Ricans living in the mainland U.S. than the island itself today. I share all its anecdotes today as a way to highlight what's special about La Brega. The spirit and determination of the people of Puerto Rico is unique against all the odds, trials, and tribulations, because the people will always rise. As Puerto Ricans, we're known for an infectious joy, positivity, because we know that Caribbean sun's going to rise tomorrow. In the meantime, we will continue with this pragmatic sense of humor as we continue bregando to get us through the next day. Muchísimas gracias.
Donaldson, and I am here to tell you about the worst night of my life. So a few years ago, in a fit of mania, I left my apartment at 2 a.m. and I walked to a bridge. And I can't tell you how long I watched the traffic, but I was trying to time it so that when I jumped and when I landed, that would be my end. It makes me sick to my stomach now to think about how bad it was. But a couple of years later, I went back to that bridge and I put these stickers all over the railing. That every few feet, you are beautiful. People who don't understand mental illness often have no idea what to say or do If they've never been a victim of invasive thoughts, they say things like, have you tried being not sad? They suggest putting essential oils on your pillowcase, like that's going to solve your chemical imbalance in your head. Or if you say things like, my hamster died, and they'll be like, that's okay, I'll help you look for it. And that is a solution to a problem that we, people with mental illnesses, don't have. We often try to subtract the risks associated with mental illness, so alcohol, gambling, drugs. But taking those things away doesn't fix mental illness. Things like poverty, crime, environmental racism all affect your mental health as well. And those aren't things you can solve by just putting a few drops of lavender on your pillowcase. You can't always subtract things. You can't always fix things. But you can learn how to be mentally resilient. I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm not going to talk to you about resilience-enhancing interventions. So instead, I want you to know that depression is a lying bastard. So there are a lot of ways to kick depression's ass. I'm going to talk about 3 of them. But first, I want you to remember this. Resiliency is not a personality trait. It's just like building a muscle. It takes time and intentionality. Don't give up on yourself. I want you to, 1, seek connection. Phone a friend, talk to a therapist. You can even call me and we can just sit on the phone and listen to each other breathe. I'm here for you. I am here for you. And I'm sure that all the other dozens, I don't know how many people are on this call, are here for you too. Seek connection. And 2, forgive yourself. It is okay to not be okay. Forgive yourself and then set small goals. Take a shower, text someone back, go for a walk. Sometimes the smallest things are the most challenging. But I want you to be proud of yourself. You did the thing. You met your goal, however small that thing was. And I want you to say to yourself, good job. I want you to, 3, thunk good thoughts. Changing your way of thinking is just as hard as those shortbread cookies in the metal tin that your grandmother bought in the 70s. Super hard. But instead of thinking, I'm a failure, try, I've been under a lot of stress. That's why I'm struggling. Instead of thinking, it's always me, try, this is a lot. I'm going to ask for help. I want you to think those good thoughts and remember that resiliency doesn't mean that you won't be exposed to hardship. It just means that you have the capacity and the strength to weather difficulties, grow from them, and remember again that depression is a lying bastard. Thank you.
My name is Jody, Collateral friend. I am a musician, songwriter, singer in the band Public Universal Friend, as well as a writer and an artist. I've been living in Indianapolis for the last 6 years, but I grew up in the Smoky Mountains in East Tennessee, where the word transgender was one that was not spoken very often, and when it was in whispers. So by the time I knew something was different about me at such a young age, before I even had the language to describe my experience to myself, I knew what I was experiencing was wrong and shameful and unlovely. But by the time I was in my mid-20s, I had a re-reckoning with my gender, and I had to realize that in order for me to transition in the ways that I needed to, a lot in my life would have to change, rather dramatically. There's a principle I've learned over the past few years, and it's that when you present your authentic self to the world, there are those people who will see it and embrace it and celebrate it with you. These are the ones I call the real ones. And then there are people who see that, and it becomes quite apparent quite quickly that their attachment to you is predicated upon your inauthenticity. And these fall away rather quickly. Resilience is a funny word when it comes to the trans experience, because for us, resilience is not a choice. It's either you are resilient or you die. And sometimes even when you are resilient, you still die. Trans people don't need to be told that they are strong or brave or powerful. We know these things. What trans people need is to know that we are safe, and that we're wanted for who we are, not in spite of it. Because it's not a matter of deserving. To embrace the spectrally enigmatic in the self is the first step toward accepting that in others. This is the final frontier of humanism, of human life. The heart of the trans experience I've found is softness, tenderness, joy, love. Because when it begins with us, we can see that in others. And it's through this that we live a life that's worth living, instead of one spent hiding or pleasing people. When I came out and decided to transition in the ways that I have, my life completely fell apart. My community fell apart. I lost everything. But I gained everything. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bisco, and I don't know what short straw I drew to have to follow those 7 incredible speakers, so I will try my very best, but if you need a snack break, go for it. The funny thing about resilience is that often when you're building it, it doesn't feel like resilience at all. It feels like fear, extreme loneliness, and it feels like despair that won't even allow you to lift your head from your pillow. I have found that so much of what we consider resilience is cultivated in the darkest of hours, where your hope seems lost. I will tell you that I didn't feel resilient 8 years ago when I was diagnosed with an acoustic neuroma, a tumor that I now know is benign, relax, on my brainstem. And I didn't feel resilient 3 years ago when I suffered a miscarriage at a time in my life when all I wanted was a child. I felt hurt. I felt angry, and I felt so jealous watching these people move around the world without being tied to the emotions that were feeling so heavy on me. But as you can see, because I'm standing here before you today, I'm still here. And now, after years of self-reflection, I've come to understand why. In my mind, there are 2 primary components to my personal resilience, a lot of which you've already heard from the previous speakers. The first is me. The second is everyone else. Or put more specifically, the second is community. When I say the first part of resilience is myself, I don't mean it to be arrogant. I mean it simply that I found it had to start with me, with convincing myself that I was going to make it. What did not help was when people said, think positive. And I was like, it's a brain tumor. Or when people said, this is very common, just try again, when I was suffering a miscarriage. These comments weren't helpful to me, even if I knew they were true, because I just wasn't ready to move on. I was okay with not being okay. I needed my own time, my own space, my own reflection to make the decision for myself that I was going to make it. Another thing about resilience is that often we view it as bouncing back or elasticity. But in my experience, there is no going back. Once I stared at my humanity and my grief in the eyes, I could no longer be the same person. I could find my way back to joy and hope, and I have. But I had fundamentally shifted the way that I move about in the world. And with that shift is where part 2 came in. Once I was ready to make the decision for myself, I cannot stress how important it was that I found a community. As a result of my brain tumor, at the urging of my physician, I joined a CrossFit gym called Naptown Fitness to gain muscle and strength in the event that I needed to undergo a significant brain surgery and 6 to 9 month recovery, which would include relearning how to walk. The very first day I walked into that gym, I met my now husband. I am convinced even now that he is the only person I could and would make it through life with. But without this brain tumor, I doubt I would have walked in that door. In the intervening 8 years, through the simple step of joining this gym, I found my people, my best friends, my confidants, and what I call my personal board of directors. But I view my community as more than that. It includes the nurse that followed me into the waiting room after my post-miscarriage appointment 6 weeks later to give me a hug. She held me there, and I don't like being hugged, while I cried so many tears into the arms of this stranger. And she did what I believe is the most important thing we can do to foster resilience in others. She sat with me. She stayed with me. She didn't tell me it was okay. She didn't try to fix it. And she didn't try to understand it. She just sat with me and saw me in my pain. And if you think that that isn't impactful, consider that was 5 years ago. Never seen her again. Never seen her since. Don't know her name. But I will never forget the moment of time that she gave to me. And that is how we spread resilience in others, in my opinion. When we have made it through, we have seen the light, we know it's possible. We've opened our hearts and our minds, and sometimes our arms, if that's what you're into. We sit with them in the moment that they need it, until they too realize that they can keep going. Thank you.